My name is Claire Martin, and the day my father told me I didn't belong in the business I practically built from scratch was the day I stopped being their daughter and started becoming their competition. They thought I'd stay quiet while they erased me. What they didn't know was that I held the supplier list. Every single name. Before I take you inside that boardroom betrayal, tell me, where are you watching this from? Drop your city or country in the comments. I'd love to know where my story is reaching. Now let me show you how betrayal sharpens you into something unbreakable. It started with the avocados. Strange, right? You'd think a corporate storm would come crashing down over profits or lawsuits or a major scandal. But for me, it started with the price of produce. I was standing in the back office of Martin and Sons market chain, third-generation family business, a name we wore like armor, even when it chafed. The room smelled like old receipts and burnt coffee, the overhead lights buzzing with fluorescent fatigue. On the whiteboard behind me, I had sketched out a dozen supply routes, color-coded, layered with deadlines, annotated with prices that changed hourly. Every one of them negotiated by me, every one built on trust. "Do you even know how much our avocado costs this week?" I snapped, eyes locked on my brother. Darren, my younger brother by 3 years and apparently born without a conscience, lounged in his chair with a venti latte, sneakers on the desk, scrolling through something useless on his phone. He looked up, smirking. "Relax, sis, it's just groceries." I clenched the dry erase marker so hard it snapped. The pieces hit the tile like brittle bones. "Just groceries," I repeated, stunned. All I had ever done was run this company like it mattered, like the vendors mattered, like the drivers whose overtime saved our hides in 2020 mattered, like the shelves that stayed full during shortages because of me mattered. But Darren thought it was all just produce. Before I could reply, the door creaked open and in walked our father. Harold Martin, patriarch, founder, walking frostbite in khakis and cufflinks. He didn't raise his voice, didn't have to. "Enough," he said, cold and final. I turned to him, expecting some flicker of backup. I was his daughter. The one who stayed when Darren bilayed for Miami. The one who canceled her honeymoon to deal with a supplier strike. The one who learned to read freight contracts before she learned to parallel park. But all I saw was steel. "If you don't like how we run things," he said, "maybe you don't belong here." My lungs stopped working for a full 3 seconds. Darren let out a short laugh, like the line was funny. Maybe it was to him. I wanted to scream, or cry, or throw the spreadsheet in my hand across the room. But instead, I just stood there. My heart pounded so loudly it felt like my ribs might break open. "Excuse me," I said, barely above a whisper. My father didn't blink. "You're emotional, Claire. Take a step back. Cool off. You're not irreplaceable." There it was, not irreplaceable. 7 years of building supplier relationships, of knowing every driver's name and every contract loophole, of waking up at 4 a.m. to catch the price drops before the West Coast caught wind. None of it mattered, because in this family, the ones who shouted the loudest always won. I felt the heat crawl up my neck, but I didn't say another word. Not because I agreed, but because something in me, something deep and silent, shifted. They didn't just devalue me. They underestimated me, and that would be their first mistake. 3 days later, I found myself staying late again, not because I had to, but because someone had to. Tara was still at her desk, nervously flipping through last month's inventory logs. She was Darren's wife, a newly minted hire in our logistics department, and if you ask me, nepotism should have been stamped on her ID badge in bold. But she was trying, at least it seemed that way. "Hey," I said gently, setting a mug of tea on her desk. "Don't worry, you'll get the hang of it." She jumped a little, startled. "Claire, I didn't realize it was already this late. I've been staring at these supplier intake sheets for an hour and none of it makes sense." I slid into the chair across from her. "That's because you're looking at numbers. What you need to see are people. Each of these vendors, they're not just names in a system. They're relationships, conversations, shared risks, mutual trust." Tara nodded, brushing a strand of her honey blonde hair behind one ear. "I didn't realize you handled so much of this personally." I smiled faintly. "Well, no one else wanted to." We went through the system slowly. I showed her which codes meant price freezes, how to interpret the weird shorthand some of the older suppliers used, how to flag discrepancies without causing offense. She was a quick study, asked smart questions, even laughed once when I explained how Charlie from Greystone once tried to bribe us with hand-packed citrus baskets. For a moment it almost felt like teamwork, but then her phone buzzed. Tara's face paled. She peeked at the screen, then glanced up at me. "He says thanks," she murmured. I tilted my head. "What?" She looked down quickly, fiddling with her pen. "Darren, he just texted, said thanks for softening you up." I didn't respond right away. A slow, cold knot tightened in my stomach, softening me up like I was some deal to grease. "I think he was just joking," she added hastily, her voice higher than before. I nodded slowly, my lips pressed together. "Right." I turned back to the spreadsheet and pointed out the reorder frequency column. But the warmth from earlier was gone. I watched her, really watched her, as she nodded and scribbled notes, her fingers trembling just a little. Like maybe she knew she'd said something she shouldn't have. I pretended not to notice. But inside, something turned over. It wasn't the text. It wasn't even the implication. It was the ease with which it came out, like I was a mark and tonight had been part of the plan, like mentoring me into silence was a job requirement. I walked her out to the lot, said goodnight, and waved as she drove off. Then I just stood there for a while, letting the wind press against me. You ever have one of those moments where everything tilts? Just a degree, just enough. Where nothing's really changed, but suddenly you know things will never feel the same. That was me. Right then, watching the tail lights of Darren's wife fade down the road, feeling the sting of realization settle into my bones. They weren't just pushing me out, they were rehearsing for it. The next evening, I was walking down the corridor past the logistics bullpen when I heard something that stopped me cold. Tara's voice, quiet, clipped, like she didn't want to be overheard. "She won't fight," she said. "She still thinks it's her company." I froze, the dim glow from her office spilling out in a diagonal slash across the hall. My heels stopped mid-step. "She's sentimental. Still acts like she owns the place just because Harold used to take her to those supplier expos when she was a teenager." A low murmur in response. I couldn't tell who she was speaking to. The door was slightly ajar, but I didn't move closer. I didn't need to. I'd heard enough. I turned and walked the other way, my feet somehow carrying me forward though my heart was stuck back there in the shadow of that doorway. By the time I reached the parking garage, I had replayed her sentence at least 10 times. "She won't fight," said with such certainty. Like I was a limp towel they'd already wrung dry. I drove home in silence, my fingers clenching the wheel tighter at every red light. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, alone in a car I bought with my own money, heading toward an apartment paid for by my overtime hours, thinking, they really think I'll go quietly. That night I skipped dinner and poured myself a glass of wine I couldn't taste. I stared at the framed photo of the grand opening of our 4th store, me in the middle, clipboard in hand, beaming. Darren off to the side, hungover but present. Tara wasn't even in the picture. And yet here she was now, whispering in the walls of the company I had given a decade of my life to. The next day, I went to the country club. I never went there for fun. Too much fake laughter, too many men in pastel shirts with empty handshakes and names I had to pretend to remember. But I knew Harold would be there, and I wasn't going to let this fester one day longer. Sure enough, I spotted him near the bar, swirling a glass of scotch, talking with a client from our warehouse group. I waited until the laughter died down before walking up. Am I being replaced? That's how I opened. No pleasantries, no soft entry. Harold barely looked surprised. "Claire," he said, as though he just remembered I existed. "Now's not the time," I cut him off. "It's a simple question. Are you phasing me out?" The client excused himself quickly, sensing the storm about to break. Harold took a sip of his drink, then turned toward me with that politician smile he wore during board presentations. "Claire," he said slowly, "you've been under a lot of stress lately. Your tone, your attitude, maybe it's time you took a little break. Recharge." "Recharge," I repeated, my throat tightening. He nodded like he was giving me a gift. "Some time off, maybe a long vacation. You've been running on fumes for a while now." "Or maybe," I said, pulse rising, "you've been orchestrating a replacement behind my back." He smiled then, tight and controlled. Claire, you're imagining things. Imagining, that word. The soft blade wrapped in silk. The way people dismiss your truth with a patronizing hand on your shoulder and a sip of scotch. I see, I whispered, stepping back. The chandelier above us warped in my vision, its light suddenly too bright, the air too cold. My heart was pounding, my hands trembling, but my face stayed frozen. I would not give him the satisfaction. Without another word, I walked out. The doorman held the door for me as I left. I didn't look back. In the parking lot, I stood beside my car for a moment, the keys trembling in my hand. A faint breeze kicked up, enough to sting. They thought I wouldn't fight. They didn't know me at all. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind rewriting conversations, drafting retorts I didn't get to say. But beneath the bitterness, something clearer emerged. A kind of sharp calm, like fog lifting before a storm. Around 2 a.m., I climbed out of bed, padded barefoot to the coat closet, and pulled down a battered black laptop bag from the top shelf. The zipper stuck, just like it always had, and I had to tug it twice to get it open. Inside was my old Lenovo. A little scratched, stubborn on boot up, but still alive. I hadn't used it since switching to the office-issued tablet, but I'd never been able to toss it. Not just because of the files, but because of what it represented. It was mine. I set it on the kitchen table, plugged it in, and waited as the screen flickered to life. My fingers hovered above the keyboard before I finally typed in the password, still standing 123. A chime. Then the old desktop opened, cluttered with folders labeled Vendor Rates 2018, Crisis Log COVID Supply, All Hands Notes, and one file I hadn't touched in years but always kept close. MasterDB Suppliers VFINAL. I clicked, and there it was. Every vendor, contact, rate lock, backchannel agreement, emergency delivery clause, loyalty bonus schedule, alternative routing, 130 suppliers in total. The real spine of Martin & Sons. Not some basic vendor list spit out by a generic CRM. No, this was living, breathing intelligence. Built over 7 years, massaged through real relationships, earned one deal at a time. Some of these suppliers worked with us only because of me. Others wouldn't even take Darren's calls. They'd replaced me without realizing I held the key to everything. I scrolled through the contacts. Ali from Evergreen Produce, Lacey from Boxport Freight, Miguel from AgroFlow, names who texted me directly when storms disrupted shipping, who sent their drivers out on a Sunday because I once called their kids to sing happy birthday. Names who never got Darren's jokes or trusted Tara's Excel files. A quiet smile touched my lips. They didn't know what they didn't know. And that, suddenly, was power. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen glowing soft blue in the dark. For months I'd been bracing for exile, clinging to the hope of fairness. But maybe that wasn't the point anymore. Maybe I wasn't losing something. Maybe I was walking away from a crumbling house with the blueprints in my pocket. I copied the file onto my personal flash drive, the one I kept in a carved wood box under my nightstand. Then I opened my safe and locked it inside. After that, I booked an appointment online. Liberty Bank, secure storage vault rental, first available, Thursday at 10:30 a.m. I clicked confirm. Then I finally exhaled, not with fear, but with something far more dangerous. Clarity. Family meeting days used to feel like battle prep. Strategy decks, vendor stats, delivery metrics all cross-stabbed by time and region. I used to care if Harold noticed the savings I squeezed from supplier negotiations. I used to think approval was something you earned. That morning, I still showed up believing performance mattered. I walked into the executive conference room 5 minutes early, binder in hand, fourth quarter supply optimization plan in sharp black and white. Jay nodded at me from his seat by the window, his laptop already open. He looked tired, and I would later wonder if he already knew what was coming. Tara was seated beside Darren, her hands folded too neatly, like someone had coached her posture. Darren was laughing at something on his phone. Probably a meme, definitely not a metric. Harold walked in exactly on the hour, not a second late, not a second early. He didn't sit, just planted himself at the head of the table like he was standing at a funeral. His face was unreadable. "Let's begin," he said, snapping the room to silence. I waited for my cue. When it didn't come, I cleared my throat and opened my binder. I'd like to start with the Q4. Harold held up a hand. That won't be necessary. I blinked. I'm sorry. He looked at Darren, then Tara, then back to me. Tara will be handling supply from now on. The words echoed as if someone had dropped a glass in the center of the room. My ears rang. Tara, I repeated, stunned. She'll take over vendor relations, restocking strategy, freight contracts, your area, essentially. Tara avoided my eyes, choosing instead to straighten the already perfect stack of papers in front of her. She's been shadowing you for weeks, Harold added, like this was a natural evolution, not an ambush. We feel it's time for fresh energy. Fresh energy. Like my decade of 4 a.m. supplier calls and emergency reroutes during winter storms with stale air. You feel, I said, trying not to let my voice crack. This is a decision you made without consulting me. We didn't need to, Harold replied smoothly. It's not a demotion, Claire, it's a redirection. You've become too embedded, too close to the old way of doing things. This business needs to grow. Darren laughed under his breath. She means micromanaging the avocado truck down to the last mile. My hands clenched around the edge of the binder. This isn't about produce. This is about trust. You're cutting off the head of our logistics pipeline and replacing it with someone who couldn't read a Poe sheet 3 weeks ago. Darren's chair squeaked as he leaned back. Oh, come on, Claire, it's just groceries. Harold ignored me completely. He closed his folder and spoke to the room. We appreciate Claire's service, but it's time to clear the path forward. You have 5 minutes, he said, turning to me now, to pack your things and disappear forever. Silence. My cousin Jay looked up sharply, eyes flicking between me and Harold as if waiting for someone, anyone, to call this what it was, a coup. Disbelieving laughter rose in my throat but never made it out. This was how it ended, not with a meeting. Not even with HR. Just a cold sentence spoken over the bones of the company I had carried on my back. I slowly rose from my chair. The binder in my hands felt heavier than it had that morning. Not just ink and paper now, but proof. Of everything I'd done, everything they were throwing away. You're making a mistake, I said, voice calm but flint-edged. No, Harold replied. We're making space. I looked around the table one last time. No one met my gaze. Not even Tara, who had the gall to tuck a loose strand of hair behind her ear like this hadn't all been rehearsed. Jay's jaw was clenched so tightly I could see the muscle ticking. Without another word, I turned and walked out. Down the hallway I had painted during our first renovation. Past the portraits of Harold shaking hands with local mayors. Past the place where I used to pin vendor thank you cards on the bulletin board during COVID when morale was slipping and we still showed up anyway. At the elevator, I paused, pressed the button, and then I clutched the binder to my chest like armor. No tears, no second glance. They had just made me disposable. They had no idea I was already irreplaceable. I didn't cry in the elevator, or when I walked past the lobby where I'd once trained 3 managers in the same week we launched digital coupons, or even when I passed the photo wall featuring Harold, Darren, and me before they cropped me out of everything. But by the time I reached my office, my hands were shaking. I shut the door behind me and stood still, staring at the room like it had already been cleared out. The framed certificates. The hand-signed thank you card from our main distributor in Pittsburgh. The potted plant I'd forgotten to water but had somehow survived anyway, just like me. This space had been my second skin, and now I had 5 minutes to shed it. I grabbed a cardboard box from the bottom shelf, one of the spares used when we moved files to storage. Then I started loading. Folders first. Notebooks with scribbled deal clauses. A stack of delivery schedules marked with my handwriting and highlighter codes no one else had bothered to memorize. I wasn't crying, but my throat burned like I'd swallowed too many unsaid words. At the back of the drawer, I found a laminated thank you card from our Ohio warehouse team. Thanks for fighting to keep us open during COVID. You're the reason our families ate that year. Every name signed beneath it. I clutched the card to my chest for a moment, willing my breath to steady. They might erase me from their boardrooms, but not from memory. The knock on the door startled me. I wiped my face with the back of my hand even though there were no tears, just nerves on fire. Come in. Jay stepped in, tall and stiff in his worn blazer. His face was pale, but his eyes were sharp. I just heard, he said. They're pushing you out, I gave a hollow laugh. Apparently I'm too sentimental to manage supply. Jay shut the door behind him, glancing toward the hallway before lowering his voice. They blindsided you. No, I said, they made a bet. Jay tilted his head. What kind of bet? I closed the lid of the box and placed the thank you card carefully on top. They bet I wouldn't fight, that I'd walk out without looking back, quiet, dignified, like I'd earned my own removal. Jay stared at me for a moment. Then he did something that made my throat clench all over again. He nodded. You're not going alone. I blinked. What? Jay stepped forward, lowering his voice. I've got 10 delivery managers who only stayed because of you. 5 warehouse supervisors who say your name like it's a guarantee. You think they'll just switch to taking Tara's calls? Darren doesn't even know how to read a stockout alert. I searched his face, unsure if this was pity or something else. But there was steel behind his words. I've been on the fence for months, he admitted. I watched them start phasing you out little by little, meetings without you, system access tweaks, all of it. And you didn't say anything. I wanted to believe it wasn't intentional, he said quietly. That Harold would come to his senses, that Darren was just being Darren. He paused, then added, but what they did today, that wasn't business, that was betrayal. I swallowed hard. Jay looked at the box in my hands. Where are you going? I shrugged. Home for now, he hesitated. Can I help you carry anything? I opened my mouth to protest, but stopped. For the first time in days, I didn't feel entirely alone, so I nodded. Jay picked up the second box I hadn't started packing yet, and together we stepped into the hallway. I expected silence, maybe a few turnbacks. What I didn't expect was the crowd. It started small. Miriam, from scheduling, stood near the copier with her arms folded. Tomas from Dry Goods Logistics paused mid-delivery manifest. One by one, others emerged, assistant managers, drivers on break, admin staff, not speaking, just watching. Then Miriam stepped forward. Claire, she said, voice calm, you were the only one who didn't cut our hours when the pandemic hit. You brought me extra hand sanitizer from your own house when we ran out. You're the reason I could keep feeding my kids. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Tomas stepped beside her. You covered my truck when I got sick last winter. No one even knew, you just did it. More people joined. Little nods, silent steps. A chain of unspoken loyalty forming behind me like a current. Jay lifted his chin. She's the reason any of us still had jobs during COVID. The words echoed through the corridor. I stood still, box in arms, eyes wide. In the parking lot, I expected to walk alone. Instead, I left with an army. The hallway didn't stay quiet. By the time we reached the side entrance of the building, the line behind me had tripled. Warehouse clerks in worn hoodies, delivery drivers still in uniform. Even Cynthia from payroll had left her desk, arms crossed, jaw tight. No one said much, but they didn't have to. Their presence was enough. I didn't ask them to follow. And yet they did, like gravity had shifted and I was somehow its new center. Jay carried a second box to the curb. I loaded mine into his pickup, the creak of the tailgate punctuating the strange silence that had settled over the parking lot. I turned to face them. Some I knew by name, others only by their clipboard signatures or the way they handled the night shift without ever complaining. These weren't corporate assets. They were people I'd fought for when Harold wanted to cut hours, when Darren delayed their raises, when management wanted to swap overtime for loyalty points. And now here they were, with me. You don't have to do this, I said, not sure if I was addressing them or myself. Jay stepped forward first. He didn't say anything, just stood beside me, the box still in his arms like a quiet shield. Then Miriam joined him, then Tomas, then 3 more, 5 more, a dozen, until we formed a silent half circle on the pavement. The late morning sun cast long shadows. Someone's phone buzzed. No one moved. I looked around and realized this was no longer a walkout. It was a witness. They weren't following me out of sympathy. They were stepping into the open because they were tired of pretending loyalty went both ways when it clearly didn't. She's the reason we still had jobs during COVID, Jay said again, louder this time. Not Harold, not Darren, Claire. The group murmured in agreement. A few clapped, slow but firm. Cynthia wiped her eyes. I opened the passenger door of Jay's truck and took one last glance at the building behind me, its polished brick facade. The window to the conference room where Harold had sentenced me without so much as a real explanation. The double doors where I once walked in at 6 a.m. every Monday without fail, coffee in hand and hope in my chest. It all looked smaller now, like something I'd outgrown. I turned back to my people. "Thank you," I said, voice steady despite the lump in my throat. "But don't do anything that'll put your paychecks at risk, not for me." Jay raised an eyebrow. "Claire, they already put our paychecks at risk. You just gave us permission to stop pretending otherwise." A few heads nodded. Someone muttered, "Damn right." I climbed into the passenger seat, closed the door, and rested the binder across my lap. Jay started the engine. As we pulled out, no one dispersed. They stood together, shoulder to shoulder, watching us go, not with defeat, but with the quiet dignity of people who had finally chosen a side and knew they were choosing right. We'd barely made it to the far end of the lot when the door behind us slammed open. Jay slowed the truck instinctively, both of us turning toward the sudden burst of chaos behind us. Harold. He came storming out like a man on fire, suit jacket half-buttoned, tie askew, eyes scanning wildly until they locked on me. "Claire," he shouted. "You turn around right now." His voice bounced off the asphalt, sharp and cracking like a whip. A few employees still in the lot froze where they stood. Some turned. Some didn't. No one moved toward him. Harold stomped down the stairs, phone clutched in one hand like a weapon, the other waving frantically at someone just inside. "Call legal, get me Stein on the line, now, we've got a breach," Jay muttered. Well, that escalated fast. But I said nothing. Just sat still, the binder resting across my lap, the sun warm through the windshield. "She stole company data," Harold yelled to no one in particular, spinning toward the building. "Supplier contracts, contact lists, that was our intellectual property." I didn't have to hear the rest to know what was happening. The panic, the scrambling, the sudden realization that what they'd dismissed as just groceries was actually the entire nervous system of their operation, and it was gone. Darren appeared a moment later, practically jogging across the pavement, phone glued to his ear. His expression was 10 parts panic, 1 part confusion, like a kid who lit a fire and only just realized it wouldn't burn out on its own. No, listen," he was saying, pacing in frantic circles. "We're fine. She doesn't represent the company anymore. The system's just glitching. I'll resend the routing. What do you mean the shipment's delayed? What do you mean you're rerouting to her?" Jay raised an eyebrow. "Wow, that didn't take long." Harold's voice cracked like a whip again. "She is a thief. She'll regret this. Everyone will know what she did." Still seated, still silent, I finally turned my head and looked back one last time. Not to respond, not to defend myself, but to remember the moment. Harold's face red and desperate, Darren unraveling in real time, the empire behind them tilted off balance by a single shift they didn't account for, me leaving, not breaking, not begging, just leaving, and taking every ounce of real power with me. I could see the moment it hit Darren, when the calls started dropping, when supplier replies stopped coming, when trucks began rerouting and stores started missing shipments. He wasn't yelling now. He was typing. Frantically, fingers flying across his screen like he was trying to patch a hole in the hull of a sinking ship. Jay glanced at me as he pulled out of the lot. "Still sure you don't want to roll the window down and give Em a wave?" I smirked. "I already said everything I needed to with my exit." He nodded. "It's going to get ugly in there." It already is. And it was true. From the moment Harold shouted, I knew his empire had cracks he never cared to see. The loyalty of his staff, the knowledge of his vendors, the delicate chain of trust between supplier and shelf, all of it had held because I held it. He thought he could fire me and keep my work. But all he'd really done was unplug the heart from the machine. And now, he was standing in the parking lot with a lawsuit on his lips and no deliveries in his stores. I leaned my head against the window, let the sunlight warm my cheek, and whispered to myself, "You're just beginning to feel it." 2 days later, I met them at a diner off Route 45. Not a fancy place, no artisanal lattes or exposed brick walls. Just a row of sun-faded booths, a humming soda fountain, and a waitress named Bate who greeted Jay with a wink and a "back so soon." We took the back booth near the window, the one with the duct tape on the vinyl seat. And one by one they came. Miriam arrived first, still in her Martin and Sons windbreaker, hair tied in a rushed knot. Then Tomas, notebook in hand. Then Kelly from dry goods and Alan from trucking. Within 20 minutes, the booth couldn't hold them all. Jay grabbed 2 tables and dragged them together without asking. I pulled out my bag and unrolled everything onto the plastic tabletop. Maps, floor plans, lease agreements with coffee stains, a laptop still warm from the spreadsheet I declosed in the truck. 3 locations, not dreams, not sketches. Leased, secured, ready. Red Barn Markets, I said simply, pointing to the logo mocked up in red marker on the folder tab. First shipments arrive Monday. The table went quiet. Even the waitress paused before setting down the check for another table. Jay was the first to speak. You're serious? I nodded. Completely. These aren't small shops, said Alan, tracing a route on one of the printed maps. That's prime freight zone. You booked this already. I looked him in the eye. I didn't waste time crying. I planned. Kelly leaned forward. How are you staffing it? I spread out a sheet with roles, names, backup names, and a blank column for volunteers. You tell me, I said. Miriam let out a low whistle. Claire, this is war. I gave her a tight smile. No, this is homegrown. There was a beat of silence and then laughter, not cynical, not strained. Real, full-bodied, breath-releasing laughter. Jay slapped the table. You built a company in 2 weeks. No, I corrected gently. I built the foundation 7 years ago. I'm just building the walls now. That's when I saw it, what I'd been missing for months. Not approval, not fear-driven compliance, but belief. These people didn't follow me out of loyalty. They followed because somewhere along the line, I stopped being a manager and became something else. A shield, a standard. The one who didn't flinch when the budget got tight, who fought to keep paychecks whole, who remembered birthdays and stayed after shifts to help carry the load. And now, here they were, ready to build something with me, not for me. Jay lifted his cup of terrible diner coffee and raised it toward me. To Red Barn, he said. To starting fresh with the right people. Glasses clinked. Mugs followed. And for the first time in weeks, I smiled without effort. This wasn't revenge. This was resurrection. 2 weeks later, the subpoena arrived folded in half like it was just another flyer. Jay handed it to me in the back office of our temporary headquarters, a converted storage unit behind one of the Red Barn pilot locations. He didn't say anything, just waited as I opened the envelope and scanned the first lines. Harold Martin versus Claire Bennett, alleging misappropriation of intellectual property. Namely, the supplier list. Jay winced. They're really doing it. I nodded. Of course they are. They're losing ground, so now they're grabbing for the last weapon they've got, intimidation. You gonna fight? I looked up at him. No, I said, folding the letter slowly. I'm going to win. The day of the hearing, I wore gray, not black like I was mourning, not red like I wanted to fight. Gray like stone, quiet, solid, steady. Jay walked beside me through the courthouse hallway, carrying a box of folders. My heart thudded, but I kept my steps even. Cameras were already waiting outside the entrance. I didn't glance at them. Harold's legal team filed in first, 3 men in dark suits with polished shoes and eyes like spreadsheets. Harold himself followed, scowling like the lawsuit was beneath him but too important to ignore. Darren trailed behind, his phone still in hand, looking thinner, paler. Maybe the stress diet was finally catching up. I sat down at the defendant's table alone. I didn't bring a flashy lawyer. Just a notary, 2 signed affidavits, and a thumb drive filled with every email, timestamp, and signed contract that proved one thing clearly. This supplier list wasn't stolen. It was built. From scratch. By me. The judge, a sharp-eyed woman with a clipped tone, called the room to order. Harold's lawyer went first. He used words like proprietary, irreparable damage, theft of trade secrets. But when it was my turn, I stood calmly and handed the judge a folder, neatly tabbed, dated, notarized. Inside, a 7-year digital trail of supplier negotiations. Emails from my personal account. Files created on my own laptop before Martin and Sons even expanded. Signed letters from vendors confirming they'd worked with me, not with the company. And then the final page. A notarized timestamp from the day I stored the flash drive in a Liberty Bank vault. The judge flipped through each page. Slowly, Silently. Harold shifted in his seat. I didn't look at him. I looked only at the judge. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but final. This database is her personal intellectual property. The plaintiff has no ownership. Gasps from Harold's table. Darren dropped his phone. It clattered on the floor. The room spun around them, but I stood still. I turned slowly toward Harold, locking eyes. "You thought you could cut me out and keep the architecture," I said, voice even. "But what you never understood is that I was the architecture." No theatrics, no raised voice, just truth. And this time everyone heard it. Outside the courtroom, reporters pushed forward. "Claire, is it true you founded a new company in under a month? How do you respond to Harold Martin's accusations? Are you planning to expand?" I looked straight into the first lens I saw. "Justice doesn't scream," I said. "It builds." And then I walked away down the steps, past the noise, back to the quiet work of building something no one could take away from me again. Some endings don't arrive with explosions. Some come in silence, the slow unraveling of a lie, thread by thread, until there's nothing left to hold the story together. That's how Martin and Sons fell, not in one headline, but in dozens. Customer complaints, empty shelves, layoffs. It started with one store losing their Tuesday delivery. Then another skipped a Saturday restock entirely. Perishables spoiled waiting for routing confirmations that never came. Staff left when checks came late. A quiet walkout rippled across 5 cities in 9 days. Harold blamed temporary disruptions. Darren called it sabotage. But the truth was simpler. They'd fired the only person who knew how to hold the place together. And now it was collapsing under the weight of its own arrogance. Darren tried to plug the holes. I heard from someone in receiving that he spent 3 nights in a row sleeping on a cot in the back office, alternating between shouting into the phone and begging for extra shifts. Vendors stopped returning calls. Others demanded double to resume contracts they once honored on handshake terms, terms I had built. Tara, I learned, had quietly started sending out resumes. She listed herself as former logistics strategist on LinkedIn. Word got back to me that not a single major supplier responded to her outreach. And the Yelp reviews, brutal. "Out of milk for a week, this place used to be dependable. No one's answering phones, empty aisles, no managers in sight. Bring back Claire." That one hit different. By the time Red Barn Markets had their soft opening, the contrast couldn't have been clearer. Our shelves were full, our staff smiling. Our lines stretched around the block. Jay stood beside me under the fresh Red Barn sign, grinning. "You sure you don't want to go national?" I laughed. "Let's get 3 right first." Inside, the energy was electric, not just customers, but community. A little girl handed her mom a fresh roll from the bakery sample tray. One of our former drivers, now store manager, knelt down to show an elderly shopper where we'd stocked her favorite pickles. This wasn't a comeback. It was a beginning. And people noticed. Local news ran a feature titled "From Fired to Founder, Claire Bennett's Market Revolution." Then came the regional business journal, then the national blog that called me the quiet storm that shook retail. The real twist. I didn't even need to tell the story. My work did it for me. I received a letter from Harold in the second week of Red Barn's opening. Typed, 2 lines, "You made your point, you won." I stared at the paper for a long moment before feeding it through the shredder. Because this was never about revenge. It was about building something honest, something lasting, something they never could because they thought legacy could be inherited. But I knew better. Legacy isn't a name. It's a choice. Every early morning, every sleepless night, every vendor call I answered when no one else would. That's what built this. And now, standing in the center of a store filled with life, light, and laughter, I knew they couldn't take anything from me that I hadn't already outgrown. 3 months after the court ruling, I stopped checking the line outside. It was just always there. Red Barn's flagship store had become something we never put in the business plan, a landmark. Customers didn't just shop, they stayed. They brought their kids. They lingered over the fresh bread counter. They chatted in the aisles like neighbors who'd found a common language again. Somehow, in building a business, we'd restored a community. Saturday mornings were my favorite. I arrived early, long before the doors opened, just to walk the aisles in peace. There's a kind of magic in being alone in a store you built from scratch, before the registers start beeping, before the coffee grinder whirs, just silence and cinnamon and potential. Jay beat me there as usual. He was half sitting on the checkout counter, sipping coffee and skimming through a supplier invoice like it was the Sunday comics. "They're already lining up," he said without looking up. "Let them," I said, hanging my jacket on the peg we installed by the bakery. "Let them breathe it in." Jay waved a piece of feedback at me. "Customer suggestion, rooftop garden, think we should start farming." I laughed. "Only if we grow patience." "Too late for that," he said. "We're already the fastest growing indie chain in the county." That word, chain, used to scare me. Now it felt earned. Miriam arrived a few minutes later, carrying 3 boxes of fresh fruit like they were her babies. Behind her came Cynthia, tossing her keys and grumbling about how she didn't get any sleep but still wouldn't miss opening. Tomas waved from the back, already in the freezer, rearranging crates with his usual precision. The rhythm felt like a heartbeat. I watched them laugh. Stock. Move in perfect, unspoken sync. This wasn't a staff. This was family. The kind you don't inherit by name but earn by how you show up. We still had long days, late orders, machines that broke down at the worst possible time. But no one panicked anymore. We solved things together. Over time, people started telling their stories in bits and pieces. Like how Alan used to worry he'd lose his job every month at Martin and Sons. Or how Cynthia cried in her car the day she heard I'd been fired. "Didn't cry when I got divorced," she said with a grin. "But I cried for you." It wasn't just that I had led them out. It was that they'd chosen to follow and now they were building beside me. That afternoon, Jay handed me a letter folded in half. It came through the mail slot, no return address. I opened it slowly. Tara's handwriting. I knew it immediately, precise, slanted, guarded. "He's divorcing me," the first line read, "and I deserve it. I won't pretend I didn't play my part. But if you ever have room for someone willing to work from the bottom up, I'm willing to earn it." I read it twice, then folded it back up and placed it inside my desk drawer. Not as a keepsake, not as leverage, just as a reminder that some bridges burn and others wait. I hadn't decided which hers would be yet. By noon, the line outside the store had stretched around the corner. A local musician strummed soft guitar outside the door. A kid handed me a crayon drawing that said, "I love Red Barn. Thank you for the apples." Inside, every register hummed. Every shelf gleamed. Every team member moved with purpose and pride. Jay leaned beside me, arms crossed. "You sure you only want 3 of these?" I looked around at the aisles we'd built, the people we'd lifted, the peace I hadn't felt in years. "Let's make sure every person walking through that door feels seen first," I said. "Then we grow." He nodded. And for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel like I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. We'd already walked through fire. Now we were planting roots. 1 year later, Red Barn Markets had 9 stores across Ohio and Pennsylvania. 9. Sometimes I said the number out loud just to hear it, like a song lyric I couldn't believe I'd written. We hadn't rushed it. No viral franchise schemes. No soulless investor pressure. Just steady growth, built on loyalty, word of mouth, and the quiet promise that if you walked into a Red Barn, someone would greet you by name before you made it to produce. Our holiday party was held at the flagship store after closing hours. The entire space glowed with soft lights and cinnamon sugar scent. Tables lined with potluck dishes, Jay's famous smoked brisket, Miriam's peach cobbler, Tomas's empanadas, and Kelly's secret recipe, mac and cheese that absolutely involved 4 different kinds of cheese. Staff came dressed like family, because they were. Music played softly from the Bluetooth speaker in aisle 4. A couple of the younger employees turned it into a dance floor after the 3rd cup of punch. I sat near the front, not because I needed to oversee anything, but because it felt right to take it all in. To remember what silence used to feel like in this place, and how it had slowly filled with laughter, rhythm, and trust. Cousin Lily raised her glass halfway through the night. She stood atop a milk crate, the same one Jay used as his unofficial throne behind the checkout counter. "To Claire," she said, voice warm and proud, "who never asked us to follow her, but gave us every reason to." The room went quiet. Lily looked around and grinned. We always knew who the real power was, and we bet right. The applause started slow but turned thunderous. I didn't cry, though I came close. Instead, I raised my own glass. To all of you, I said. To second chances, to earned loyalty, to never waiting for permission to be who you already are. That last part stayed with me, because for years I'd waited for Harold to see me, for Darren to respect me, for anyone, to recognize that I wasn't just capable, I was the core. But they'd only ever seen what they feared: ambition, independence, clarity. And in the end, it wasn't my anger that undid them. It was my absence. A few weeks later, I passed by a shuttered Martin and Sons store on the drive to our new Pittsburgh location. The windows were papered. A faded sign hung in the window, closed for restructuring. I didn't stop, didn't slow down, didn't need to. Tara had never replied to my silence. I never followed up either. Her bridge hadn't burned, but it also hadn't been rebuilt. Some people drift out of your story when they realize they were never meant to narrate your life. Jay and I talked sometimes about opening a 10th location. Even got offers from out-of-state backers who wanted to take Red Barn national. But I always paused before saying yes. Because growth, for me now, wasn't about scale. It was about depth. I didn't want to grow faster. I wanted to grow truer. At our 9th store's grand opening, a woman approached me after the ribbon cutting. She looked nervous, dressed plainly, carrying a reusable tote with our logo on it. "You're Claire," she said. I smiled. "That's me." She hesitated, then held out her hand. "My daughter applied here last month. She was nervous, didn't think she'd fit in. She's been through a lot." Her voice trembled slightly. "You gave her the morning shift, said you saw something in her." I nodded. "I remember." "She smiles now," the woman whispered. "She talks to me again, thank you." I didn't have words, just reached out, touched her shoulder, and nodded. That's what legacy is. Not a name on a building, not a courtroom win, but one girl behind a register, one mother's relief, one community shelf by shelf, remembering what it feels like to be seen. So I kept showing up, quietly, steadily. And every time someone asked what Red Barn was about, I gave them the only answer that ever mattered. It's not just groceries. Thank you for following Claire's journey from betrayal to rebirth. If her story moved you, if you've ever had to start over and build something from nothing, tell me in the comments. What would your Red Barn be? And where are you watching from? Let's build something here too. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs the reminder. That justice doesn't scream. It builds.